Well, good evening, everyone. Tonight's program is going to be from Paul Martis, W9PEM, Digital Ham Radio and Emergency Communications. Now, this all started at Field Day, so I kind of think that this is a wrap up presentation on Field Day presentations for the year. We got to talking at Field Day about sending messages. Now, sending messages is, I think, a really big thing at Field Day. I mean, it's if done correctly, it's 200 points for the club, and I think you really can't sneeze at 200 points. Back in the day, I was familiar with only this, the ARRL radiogram, which is kind of easy, except this kind of assumes too that you're sending messages by phone. And if conditions aren't right, you don't enunciate properly, what have you, the messages just do not go through, period. Paul was telling me that there's an easier way. He did this last year, and he's done this again this year, getting the entire 200 points for us both years. And I asked him if he'd be interested in coming to the club and talking about the whole emergency communications aspect behind what he did for us on Field Day. So, Paul, if you would so kindly.
I just want to say, preface this, I'm not an expert in emergency communications, but I got into learning about how to do the digital messaging really for Field Day, just out of necessity. My interest in ham radio does kind of center around digital communications, just maybe a little more mic shy on the air than some people, but so what I wanted to cover today is kind of a tutorial, but I'm not going to cover it in detail since the slides will be shared and the video. Please go back and look at things because we don't have enough time for me to go into every detail. But I'm just going to show how I set up my system to do the Field Day messaging and then kind of talk about maybe some modes out there that are familiar and some maybe less so familiar for digital messaging that can be used for emergency communications. So if we're going to go to the next slide. This is the outline, as far as what we're going to talk about. I mentioned I'm going to spend a lot of time on WinLink because WinLink was what was used for Field Day messaging. But I'm also going to talk about other tools and modes that are leveraged for emergency comms or for just general digital QSOs. And then just kind of start out with kind of like the background of, where we all came from with emergency comms. So next slide. So really just looking at the, background for dates and everything. The ARES as the Amateur Radio Emergency Service started about 20 some years after the ARRL formed. But even, from the beginning of ham radio, amateur operators have been essential for emergency comms. When you can't get the lines are down, phone lines or if there's just a need for local or regional communications, ham radio operators have been leveraged for that since there's been ham radio. With respect to ARES, ARES is a volunteer service. Volunteers are trained to provide communication assistance in disasters. It can be for either emergency events, if there's a natural disaster, or maybe just, if there's a parade or other kind of major event to coordinate traffic. That's another aspect of where ARES can get involved. As far as getting involved, the ARRL Emergency Coordinator, which I'll have more information on the next slide, is where you go to volunteer. Related to Aries is races, which is more of a governmental service, whereas Aries is sponsored by the ARRL. And this is really only for those civil defense or national emergency type events, but typically similar trained volunteers are leveraged for both. And again, this is more creating a bridge for government agencies to help with getting situational awareness reports to government agencies and that sort of thing. Next slide. So in Ozaki County, in this presentation, I have embedded links, so please feel free to go further and visit these sites. But in Ozaki County, Aries does host regular nets and exercises to kind of get you some practice, whether or not you're an Aries operator or an official volunteer or not. Plus support local emergency operating center and hospitals. And again, like on the previous slide mentioning, there is coordination between Aries and races and at the Wisconsin state level. Our section emergency coordinator is Kyle, and there's some more information here again to look at it at the state level. It's a really good website for learning more about Aries and the type of events and practices that they have. So just some examples where ham radios made a big difference in emergencies and in natural disasters specifically. Hurricane Katrina was a big one where both voice and digital relays were used. When the local infrastructure was down, that was leveraged to get information to different agencies, coordinate relief, where things are needed at what time. Same thing in Haiti. There's a lot of use of WINLINK in this case for sending emails over radio. In 2017, there was, I think it was Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico. Again, 98% of the infrastructure was disrupted at that time. So ham radio operators were essential for just coordinating a lot of things during that recovery. And then just this year, 2025 has been quite the year for natural events, as we experienced last weekend in Milwaukee. California wildfires, packet radios used for that. And then in the Texas floods, again, Aries was used to help with the Red Cross and those sort of relief efforts. So then as far as digital, a lot of that was a mix of voice and digital. So when you come to digital emergency comms, there's an evolution once PCs became more ubiquitous and in people's homes. TNCs started coming out. People were connecting their computers to their radios and using different digital modes, mainly packet radio. In the late 80s and through the 90s, that grew a lot. There is still, I think, a pretty active packet operation in Wisconsin. I've done some packet work on VHF in Wisconsin. I won't cover that here, but as far as the reason why for going to digital, you do have that error checking that Jean-Ann kind of alluded to with the radiogram. That repeating of what was said on voice. Well, the error checking and that sort of aspect is built into the digital modes to address lost packets or that sort of thing. You can also use it for doing file support, text images. Obviously, it would take a little time, but it is possible with digital radio. And then it can be more efficient use of the spectrum and power levels, being able to get a message out where maybe in a voice mode you're you wouldn't be able to hear anything because you're below the noise floor. Then obviously a lot of modern radios incorporate sound cards, makes it easy to do this. If not, there's lots of tools and products out there to connect your radio up to a PC. So then just kind of looking at a quick survey of digital modes that I tried to look at what's popular or what I've seen out there for use for emergency use. And again, these can be used for non-emergency use as well. WinLink, which I'll talk a lot later. I'll come back to that. Basically email over HF or VHF. Pactor, now that's the WinLink system uses Pactor for kind of like a backbone. I don't think a lot of amateur radio operators get into Pactor very often because it's very expensive from a hardware perspective. JSA call, we had a presentation, I think, a few years ago specifically on JSA call, but it is a nice weak signal tool that can be used for emergency comms. FSQ is, I'll cover that more in detail. It is very similar to JSA call. Actually, JSA call was inspired by an FSQ call program. The difference is it's non-synchronous, meaning you don't have to have your clocks synchronized to use it. Whereas like JS8, like FT8, relies very heavily on time synchronization. Then with VARA, there's VARA AC, which is basically a chat program. Again, very similar features to JS8 and FSQ. There is a special MCON mode for VARA AC that simplifies the UI and adds some extra features, which I'll talk about later. And then there's a whole suite of tools that ARRL is kind of honed in on, open source tools called NBMS. And Olivia is a mode that is used for that, is popular. On VHF, I think it's used as an MT63 as a different modulation. Then on the upper bands, packet, we talked about packet, 1200 baud on 2 meter and then 9600 on 70. APRS runs on packet. You could use that for position reports or short messaging. It's convenient when you have radios that have that built in. Again, on the VARA side, there's the VARA modulation is a lot faster than packet, has some other features that are advantageous for getting messages out quickly. And then digital radios, whether you're on DMR or D-Star or Fusion, it's for emergency communications to be able to see, who it is you're talking to leverage digital groups, talk groups, and that sort of thing. Kind of is especially DMR, very much a kind of a in between the ham radio and more public service type radio systems. So then a lot of this for digital modes and ham radio come down to sound card modes, meaning you leveraging the sound card on a PC to generate tones to do the modulation to get the messages out. So variety of software tools. WinLink, again, I'm going to cover that extensively. It is available for both Windows. The primary WinLink software is WinLink Express for Windows. There is a version that is cross-platform called PAT that is also Raspberry Pi friendly if you want to build a small, low-power Pi-based system. There's some RMS gateway, and that's more for the WinLink backbone. If you're a gateway operator, you would use that. FLDigi is kind of essential for a lot of different modes. NBEMS suite leverages FLDigi, and then the FSQ mode is available as one of the many modes in FLDigi. If you haven't played around with FLDigi, definitely there's a lot there to learn and get involved with. JS8 call, I mentioned that already. It's like it's the JS8 modulation is kind of inspired by FT8, and then the software is inspired by FSQ. Um, I put a note there that in an emergency comm situation, um, some of these modes that are time synchronized, like JS8 or FT8, you will need a way to get your time synchronized if you don't have network, internet access to get to a time server. Then GPS would be a good way of accomplishing that. I mentioned VAR AC. APRS, there's various tools, software suites for APRS for Windows and other cross-platform. And then really the TNC, like I mentioned originally, it started as hardware TNCs as the interface, but really popular now are software-based TNCs. You run a piece of software, it will do the tone generation, and then you're feeding it some data from an application, and it's generating the tones that then it'll key up the radio, connect to the microphone and the speaker, and then send those out. So Direwolf is a popular one that's cross-platform. Sound Modem is what I'll be covering later. That's a Windows version. And then the Vara modems are also cross-platform. The only downfall with Vara is to get access to the higher speeds, you do have to pay for a license. Okay, so one of the core ARRL sponsored or focused emergency comms suite is called NBEMS, Narrowband Emergency Messaging Software. And it's really a collection of tools centered around the FL Digi suite for making it easy to generate and send standard forms, ICS forms, kind of like how WinLINK does with ICS forms. Because if it's in FL Digi, depending on the modulation, it can be used on HF or VHF. It's all open source. One of the related FL Digi tools is called FL Message, and that's a form generator. This is a screenshot of FL Message, where you can kind of see it's got places to put the kind of key details of what the incident response form content is. And then, there's other forms that are common, like with what was done at field day, I used ICS 213 that was specifically called out in the field day rules as an example form. So I used that. I did not use this suite for field day, but absolutely this could have been used for that. There's some links there to the FL Digi website for downloading, and then more information about NBEMS and how to set that up. FSQ, I had not ever heard of FSQ until a couple of years ago. I'm part of a kind of a play group of ham radio operators that like learning weird niche digital modes, and we were played with this for several weeks. It's built into FL Digi, and it has very similar features like if you've ever used JSA call or VAR-AC. It's got beacons. It's got directed or group messaging. You can use it for checking in. It uses an MFSK modulation. So again, it's not time synchronized like the others. But that modulation does get out pretty well in weak signal. Maybe not as good as maybe like a VARA or JS8. But it is a really interesting mode that I don't think gets a lot of attention. But just wanted to include that in here because it was an inspiration for, I would say, maybe a more popular tool, which is JS8 call. Next. So, like I said, we had a previous conversation, a previous presentation of JS8. So I'm not going to go too deep into that. I've already mentioned a lot of the key points here about where it kind of originated and the fact that it is time synchronized. It does have standard frequencies, and I will mention for things like FSQ or really a lot of these emergency comms tools, standard frequencies are important. Really, standardization is important. So that way, if you are expecting people to receive your signals, that you're agreeing on specific frequencies to kind of park on and channelize. It's in a way you're channelizing the spectrum for these type of tools. I'm like the other ones, it does do broadcast. They have a heartbeat thing to like kind of let people know that you're out there without really sending any message data. But in general sense, JSA call is just a great tool for doing long form QSOs. Little slow because like FT8, it's on these cycles. The standard cycle and standard speed in JS8 is on 15-second cycles. So the words per minute are pretty slow. You can change it to there's a fast mode and a turbo mode. It uses more bandwidth and shorter cycles. But obviously it kind of clogs up the channel a little bit more by doing so. There are some interesting integrations for APRS and SMS. I've sent both SMSs. I've sent short messages to cell phone via JS8 over there, and I've checked in position reports on APRS via JS8. So, if, for example, you're, out in the field, or maybe you're doing a PODA activation, and you have no way of spotting yourself. Well, you could spot yourself on the APRS network using JSA call, if you know what your grid square is. But then there's a link there for that install. Next slide. RAC, similar but different, is what I'd say about it. Similar where you can kind of see who's been beaconing and who's out there. You can do CQ calls. You can do directed things. There's a lot of other features that are baked into here. You can do voicemail. With voicemail, really just like you're kind of parking a message for someone to pick up later. I mentioned the MCON mode, which does again kind of integrates those standard forms. You can change the rate at which you beacon, again trying to form that network of emergency operators to know who's out there and who's able to be communicated. You could do a lot of relaying. So if you're trying to get a message out to another operator, but you don't have a direct path to them, you can relay easily through other operators. You could do that with JS8. I'd say it's probably a little bit easier with RAC. But like I said, it's all based around and requires the VARA modems, whether it's the HF or the FM. I would say I've never successfully used VARA FM with VARAC, but on HF it works great. I mentioned APRS. APRS probably doesn't need much of an introduction. It's been around for a while. I think most people understand what APRS is, but I like the Pinpoint software. It's very easy to use, modern UI. It has everything you would need for doing APRS beaconing, doing messages. It also has, like I said, some other integrations for the APRS IS if you want to, use it as an iGate, blah, blah, blah. It's an alternative, I think, a great modern alternate to APRS what was it, APRS ISCE or 32? 32, yeah. Right. Our APRS station is running on the 32 one. Just this one, it is Windows only. What the other one is too, but really nice user interface is why I like it. Next slide. Okay, WinLink. So go ahead and go next slide. So mention it's really focused on email. You can use it for just straight email. You could use it for doing point-to-point messaging. It's very flexible. It is kind of more of an official tool for some agencies. It doesn't need the internet to route messages. However, when the internet is available, it's very convenient to route messages between the gateways. Um, it does offer WinLink Express specifically integrates capabilities for the VARA modulation and RDOP, which I'm not going to talk about RDOP because I never used it yet. So that's for another time. But it is another modulation that can be used on the air like VARA or Pactor if you have one of those. But for field day, again, the key feature that I used this for was because it made sending the ICS 213 forms very easy. Go to the next slide. So how do you use WinLink on the air? Again, HF, you can use VARA, RDOP, or Pactor. On VHF, Packet is the method that I used during field day. I connected to the Oz Aries Packet WinLink gateway up in Saukville, I think it is, or Port Washington. You can use VARA FM, which a lot of WinLink nodes do support VARA FM. I tried to use VARA FM with the Oz Aries access points and it never worked. So I don't know if it's something I did wrong, but Packet, it works as long as you have a sufficiently strong signal to get into those gateways. All right, next slide. So again, I'll leave this to kind of further review, when you can view this on a PC. But essentially, there's these RMS radio message servers that are serving as gateway sites, radio gateways to either a radio link between other RMS servers or through the internet to route messages. And then there's a central message server, again, depending on what's available, whether it's routed through internet or it could be completely radio based. The point for using WinLink, sending email via the field, using the standard forms, and then receiving messages when you don't have internet access. Next slide. So like with some of the other tools, obviously you have the radio and you need a sound card interface, whether your radio is built in or one of the hardware devices. I use DigiRig. Some people have SignalLink. Whatever you have, get that audio in and out of your PC to your radio and something to key the radio. I mentioned different softwares before, WinLink Express and PAT. There are some others. Outpost works really well. There is a client for iOS called Radio Mail and one called WOAD, WinLink over Android, I think it's called. WOAD, an Android client. Obviously, again, need to have a way of getting from a phone or a tablet to your radio. And then I kind of covered the other access methods as well. Next. So again, this now kind of gets into more of a tutorial about how to set up and use WinLink. When you fire up the client, you need to set up an account, use your call sign, set up a password, your location. The next slide. Via the WinLink website, you can do some interesting things. Most interesting is what's called the accept list. WinLink is set up where you cannot receive any internet originated inbound messages by default. If you send a message from your WinLink account to an internet address, then it automatically populates on your accept list because it assumes that you want to receive a reply back from that email address, so-and-so at gmail.com, adds to your accept list. Now, when so-and-so at gmail.com emails your WinLink address back, it will accept that and deliver the message to you. But it's basically spam free because unless you absolutely subscribe to whatever that email address is, you will not get anything back. So No one can unsolicited email a WinLink user. The WinLink user has to either go on the website and add that to the accept list or originate a message from WinLink first. Uh, Next slide. So how do we use WinLink Express? So it's a, a familiar sort of email client, really. You've got folders you can create, inbox, read, sent items, saved, deleted items, just like any other sort of email system. The difference is how it gets sent out of the client. And up at the top right, that open session is really the key as far as how you're going to get your messages that you compose within WinLink out. As far as composing the message, you can just open up a new message and just type a message like normal, like any other email client, and put it into your outbox, open a session to send it and send it. When it comes to the standard forms, there's a kind of a unique way that WinLink Express guides you through that. So next slide. So there's these templates inside WinLink Express. And I have it shown here underlined. I've started a new message. I hit select template. And then in the templates, I went down to ICS 213 general message. So then what'll happen is a form, the ICS 213 form will open up in a web browser. Now it's not actually connected to anything. It's just using the web browser as a front end for the form for you to fill out. So next slide, I'll show you what that looks like. So here, after I hit open, it pops up my web browser, and then I have the structure of the standard form shown, and then there's these numbered fields that are part of that ICS 213 standard that you would fill through. So, incident name or event. Here I put the August 2025 presentation. Who's it going to? The ORC club members from me. Subject is the ICS 213 test message, today's date, time, and then you put your message, who it's approved by. Again, this is, if you think about this from a emergency comms perspective, and if you've got some sort of structure to the emergency response agency, this is where some of these fields may not make a lot of sense in a general sense, and even for the field day messages didn't make a whole lot of sense. But in a real organized emergency comm situation, it may make more sense for having approved by titles and that sort of thing. And then when you hit submit here, it will take that content and basically format a message back in the WinLink client for you, which you could have just done if you know how the structure of an ICS format, or a radiogram for that matter, because there's radiogram forms. If you know how to structure that in text, you could just type it in. But these forms make it easy to make sure you're doing it right. Next slide. So then here, after I submitted that, it took the content and put it into the standardized text structure of an ICS 213, which is not super complicated. It's just these numbered fields just put in order, really. So, and like I said, if we're to look at using the radiogram form in WinLink, it would look super familiar to a regular, voice radiogram structure. So then from here, in the top left, post to outbox is what you would click next. So then this, just like any other email, you'd put who you're sending it to. What I did for this presentation, I used the WinLink, kind of like a reflector email. There's like test, I think it's like test@winlink.org. If you send it to that, it'll send it back to you. So it's just a reflector email. So I sent this to the test, and I'll show you how I sent it out and then how I got it back. So next slide. So again, I'm not going to go too deep because there's way too much here to talk about in the presentation, but please use this information for reference. Next slide. I use sound modem to act as the software TNC for my Windows installation. Key things there, you have to set your input and output devices, your audio devices, and how you key up the radio. And then because you've got multiple software tools running on your PC, they communicate to each other via ports, basically local network ports. So in this case, that the port information is important because that KISS modem, that KISS TNC operates on a network port on your PC so that the other application can talk to this TNC. Instead of having a serial cable to a hardware TNC, you're using a network port between applications. Next slide. And then now I'm back in WinLink, and here again, I'm making sure the ports match, and just I left the defaults. Here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to send that test message via the Oz Aries packet VHF using my 2-meter radio and a DigiRig interface. Next slide. So here I'm choosing the channel, basically, which is the node that I'm going to connect to that's going to accept my message. And here I'm using WI9OZ-11 on 145.610. So because if you have a 2-meter radio that has cat control, you can leverage cat control, but I don't have cat control for mine. So it tells you at the bottom there, set the packet radio frequency to 145.610, just a reminder to tune your radio to that frequency. Then you hit start, and the next slide. So then what happens is I'm using packet. This is regular Wolf Hunter baud packet. On the left side of the screen is WinLink Express, showing how it's connecting to the Oz Aries network. There's the password exchange. There's information from the RMS node about what version it's running. It acknowledges who it is, WI9OZ11, and then that part where it says sending, there's each message, like that message that I created, has a unique ID. So it sends that message, then tells you when it's complete, how long it took. It took 45 seconds to send 1976 bytes. So it's not terribly fast. And then on the right side, you see kind of like the raw packet data exchanges back and forth between my radio and the RMS node. And then there's some waterfall at the bottom for that sound modem shows you. It's just anyway, next slide. Okay, so email went out. It's now on the WinLink central message server. So now I want to get my reply back. So what I did for this, I decided I'm going to get the reply back via HF. So there's a whole other way of setting up for HF. I use VARA HF for the modem for HF. So some information here, very similar. Set up audio, set up ports, set up way to key the radio. So next slide. We can keep clicking through that one. I'm using, in this case, my QMX to send it. So here, that's fine. Here I'm not going to go into it, but there's it's like with the VHF, you pick a channel. Again, it's a remote station that's listening for WinLink traffic. This one happens to be can't read it from here. KN4CCQ, 523 miles away. Same thing. You've got the WinLink data exchange. In this case, I am receiving a message, and that's the VARA modem interface there on the right showing VARA data going back and forth. So now I'm getting that response, that reply back over HF. I'm using the VARA modem. Okay, next slide. So I got the message, all's good. Here, what I'm showing here is an example of the ICS message that I sent this year at Field Day to our section manager. That helped get 100 of the 200 points. Just sending one message to the section manager gets you 100 points, and then 10 points per every other message sent, up to another 100 points. Next slide. The section manager was kind enough to respond via WinLink during field day. So this is a response. I hope you are having a fun and successful field day. Thank you very much, Jason. Next slide. So I know I went through that quickly. Please, if you're interested in setting up your system to do this, go back through that. There's obviously many other ways, and I'm using Windows. There's other cross-platform tools to accomplish this, but this is just one way in how I did this for field day. So then best practices, I want to kind of talk a little bit about, what to consider when you're getting into this. So really, and this came up at a field day is, if you only do this once a year, will you remember how to do it the next year? So will your system be set up the way it should be? So you really got to practice, setting up your tools, keeping them updated. Send emails to yourself if no one else, you don't have anyone else to send them to, but just to practice. Like I said, there's the Aries nets that operate in Wisconsin. There is a digital net on Tuesdays on WinLink during a 24-hour period. There's information there on that website about that. I mentioned keep the software tools updated. Depending on the band or the conditions, understanding what tools and what different modes are out there to leverage. And if it is a real emergency consideration, it's probably being coordinated, channels and tools anyway, but being familiarized with a variety of tools, especially if you are an Aries volunteer, then you have more tools in your toolbox to be able to participate. If you can, a Go box is kind of cool. I think a few years ago we had a presentation from Peter. He made a little HF Go box. I found this one is online somewhere. They've got a little display integrated into that. Super cool. There's a Elecraft radio and an HT. I don't know if people want to just keep about $3,000 worth of radio stuff in a box, but hey, it depends on how serious you are if you could afford a box like that. But anyway, the other thing that I thought I wanted to add in here when it comes to emergency comms, usually the event or the incident or the emergency is local or localized, floods, hurricane, you're talking about a local area. I'm not going to go into antenna design in here, but I just wanted to mention that a lot of times NVIS, near vertical incident antennas are leveraged for this sort of thing, because you want you're not doing DX. You're not trying to talk with, Italy about the flood, down the street, or, in a tri-county area. You want to get local coverage. So NVIS would be often the type of antenna used for these type of deployments. So I did a real quick example. If you're covering, maybe like within the state or within, near region on 40 meters, if you place a dipole between 0.1 and 0.25 wavelengths, so that's 4 meters up to 10 meters above the ground, you could see the antenna pattern there. You get a pretty good vertically oriented, straight up propagation shape to your antenna. So again, not going to go too deep. Just wanted to mention that as something that as I was going through this, I didn't talk about antennas. You have to talk about antennas at least once, and NVIS antennas are often used for this. Next slide. Okay, so quick wrap up here. Next slide. So some just key points just wanted to get across. Digital is very handy. It doesn't supersede or replace voice. Obviously, picking up an HT and getting on a repeater if it's available for very local type response is important. But it does complement voice. It's good for data. Like Jean Ann started out beginning saying, it would have been a lot easier if I didn't have to repeat. Just let the mode and let the software do the hard part for you. When I like that little image at the bottom, and it's for the second bullet, when all else fails, you still have a radio. These different standardized modes kind of really are where they're focused for MCON, because you have to have those standards. You can't just go hunt and peck for people, on random frequencies. You need to have that coordination. So that's really important. Practice, I mentioned practice. Integrated, being able to, don't be shy of just playing around with the new modes, even if it seems unfamiliar. There's a lot of things I didn't know about with that. Just kind of digging into some of the tools and kind of making some QSOs, not an emergency case, just to get familiarized. And then obviously we know the last bit. We're here to help. Next slide. We've got, again, for reference for afterwards, I've got some links to mainly the ARR website. This happens to be the 90th anniversary this year of Aries, which I thought was interesting. And then some other links about digital comms that I found helpful that I referenced for the presentation. And I think that's it. Any questions?
Stan, some years ago when the Linda E sank in Lake Michigan, the cops could not talk from up on the top to their people down on the shoreline. And in Aries, we made the link. So as a perfect example, that was a voice situation, not a digital situation, but still a relay, and it worked. It worked. So hams can do it when nobody else can do it.
Thank you, Paul. Excellent presentation. Thank you.